Mic testing 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. The director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci from USA, said that a uniform approach is necessary to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic rather than strategies that vary state by state. Panel, the affirmative team believes that a uniform COVID-19 strategy is crucial for the development of the East African community in terms of social and economical climate, the private sector development, and the achievement of its objectives. My name is Eben Mzaban from the United Republic of Tanzania, and I am the Secretary General of the affirmative team. Guided by me is my 2 Deputy Secretary Generals who are going to focus more on the principal justifications of our motion. Thereby we have the Chairperson of the Council and the Amis Curie who are going to talk about more on capacity, providing a framework on this motion, more dimension, as well as structural strategies regarding the motion. Therefore we have implement is going to be feasible in the future. But this is necessarily a motion on value, and we don't expect the alternative team to be focusing on any issues of feasibility in this debate. Secondly, we need to identify that this motion is not about whether countries can or cannot be sovereign, but the motion is really on whether countries should be sovereign and how that will impact these countries. Thirdly, we need to provide, when we're looking at a similar COVID-19 strategy, we're referring to a similar framework being done by these countries and not necessarily a same framework done by these countries. This looks like something like a regional responsive task force, which will be focusing on coordination, mobilization, as well as surveillance and monitoring, as well as structural reform strategies, things that you'll hear from Edgar later on in my speech, right? But before I move on to my substantive, I'll take a POI.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind you that it is very unlikely that you will establish the value of something without determining its feasibility. Thank you.
Panel, whenever you're given a motion, right, you need to identify whether this motion is of value or of practicality, right? So when we're given this motion, right, this it's a motion of value, which means that there's certain things that are assumed, and which means we don't need to engage on them because we're only looking at the value on it and not this implementation. Moving on. Panel, we need to look at the need, right? Whenever policy implementations are actually done, right, they usually focus on the need. What is the need when we look at COVID-19, right? We think that when it comes to the geography of the East African countries, they all exist in the same geographical location. This means that if you want to reduce COVID-19, right, the only way we can reduce COVID-19 is by making sure that there is a uniform strategy that is implemented across the East African countries to ensure that there's a same response in each country. Let me ask you a question, right? Each country in the EAC has, up until this point, have different measures or different strategies of actually achieving this COVID-19 or solving the COVID-19 crisis, right? The question I need to ask you is, how effective has that been? I think we all know the answer to that. The only way we can solve this problem is by a unified COVID-19 response. Secondly, I need to prove that a uniform COVID-19 strategy is actually a roadmap to the political federation. One of the objectives of the East African community is actually to inevitably form a political federation. This means that there will be a decision that will be implemented or be done by all these states, right? Up until this point, I don't think that there's an individual who can actually actualize or visualize what a political federation looks like, right? But we think that a uniform COVID-19 strategy, which would be done in each and every country, would be an idea to the people in visualizing how a uniform political federation will be done in the countries as time goes on. I'll take you.
Okay, so do you have an example of any economic or political bloc in the world that has been able to implement a uniform COVID-19 response policy?
See, panel, that's the problem, right? We don't currently have any bloc that's actually doing that. But that is the reason why COVID actually hasn't been solved up until this point, and that's why this motion was formed in the first place. Now, looking at our substantive, firstly, looking at the EAC objectives, right? It's been seen in a number of treaties that do exist in the EAC about how there should be joint strategies that should be done by the EAC in ensuring that there is a uniform COVID-19 strategy that should be done in these countries. We think that when the protocols are the same, it therefore feeds into the guiding principles of integration as well as movement, right? We think that when there is the same protocols that are put in place, movement becomes simpler, right? States having different policies during COVID, right? We think the COVID period was a time when different countries were actually suffering due to this virus. So the only way we can actually make sure that each and every country is catered for is when we have a uniform COVID strategy for this, right? But secondly, we think that in terms when we have a uniform COVID strategy, it's going to go irregardless of the leadership that is going to get into such countries, which we think is very important for the uniformity of the policies as time goes on. Thirdly, we think that the effectiveness of a policy is rather in its implementation. And that's why we can currently see that the current strategies, as alternative team has been saying, isn't actually solving the problem, right? So we think that when we have a uniform strategy, it's going to increase to make sure that when we have economics, right? If one country is going to be doing a lockdown, every country is going to be doing a lockdown in such a way that it's not going to affect one country in terms of reducing the economic stature and actually not achieving the goals of the EAC objectives. With that, panel, I thank you.
Just give me 1 second. Okay. I'm audible, right? Okay. So shortly. So my name is Warimo Manyara from the Republic of Kenya, and I'll be speaking as the first Attorney General. To begin with, I'll begin by introducing the rest of my team. We'll have Sarah, who'll be speaking as the second Attorney General, and who'll be speaking about the political differences that generally exist within the East African community as an economic bloc. We'll have Garang speaking as the third Attorney General, who'll come to elaborate on our policy and how, to a certain extent, if we can be able to achieve the end, which in this case is having a comprehensive, for example, approach taken by East Africa towards solving COVID-19, then we think that we can take this debate. Fourthly, we'll have Ian, who'll be speaking about how different states generally have different capacities within the region, and hence not only would it be unequal, right? It would be a disproportionate response to the problem that we have, that is COVID-19 right now. Fifth, as the fifth Attorney General, we'll have Esther, who'll be speaking about the future economic impacts that are likely to accrue specifically in the political and in the political sphere of the economic bloc if we were to pursue the strategy that they state. And lastly, we'll have Eduro, who will summarize and whip for us this debate. Okay, so where to begin with, right? I think firstly, I'll begin by responding directly to the last speaker that spoke. We think that they had a lot of valid arguments, right? But we think that also they can't necessarily have their cake and eat it, right? So they can't say that they're going to solve the problem that is COVID, but not necessarily say that they won't deal with how efficient the mechanism that that they're proposing is going to be, right? So we think that for them to be able to fully engage this debate, right, they have to deal with how plausible, right, how efficient will their solution be. So they can't tell us that we can't tell them that it's not likely to work and why it's not likely to work or how it's going to have certain impacts. They have to engage fully. It's not just a principal motion when COVID is a reality. Secondly, right, we think that the second thing that we're going to address in, okay, so secondly, right, we think that the second thing that we're going to address in this debate, right, is the nature of East African countries, right? We don't necessarily think that this debate exists within a vacuum. We think that not only, we think that the spectrum that generally exists within East Africa is that we have different countries, we have different languages, we have different countries with different economic development levels, we have different countries with different capacities, right? Secondly, right, even in the nature of the economies that we have, right? We have different states that have different industries that they depend on to develop. For example, right, South Sudan and Rwanda don't necessarily depend on tourism, right, for majority of their income that's derived within their states. Countries such as Kenya, Tanzania heavily rely on the tourism industry, right, which contributes to nearly more than 50%, especially when it comes to the total income revenue of those states. What this means, right, is you can't impose a lockdown in Tanzania, Kenya, South Sudan, and for example, Rwanda, right, and expect that it's going to have the same effects, right? Kenya, Tanzania are going to be impacted very devastatingly, right? As opposed to South Sudan, which doesn't necessarily have as many impacts if they don't have as many tourists. So we don't have the same nature of economies. We don't depend on the same sources of revenue. We can't have a uniform application. Now,
panel, please note that we mentioned that we're only focusing on similar and not same, basically meaning that if a lockdown is going to be imposed in the East African communities, it's not going to be the same lockdowns in terms of the degree of lockdown that's going to exist in these countries.
My problem with the affirmative side, right, is they want to say we're doing a uniform policy, but it's not uniform in all the cases, right? I think you have to be very clear about what uniform means, right? Uniform means currently Nairobi, Kenya doesn't have a lockdown. Uganda locks down at 7 p.m. Rwanda locks down at 7 p.m. as well, right? Uniform would mean that all countries in East Africa right now would have to have a lockdown, and you have to defend that stance. You can't keep shaking and moving around and not take the hard stance.
So do you want to assert just because we have some national interest in tourism, we should prioritize national interest over the overall benefit of integration?
Okay, you want to make it seem like it's trivial, right? But at the same time, we have states, tourism is not just a small thing, right? We say more than 50% of your revenue is derived from tourism, right? Economies have suffered. So at the end of the of food that individuals get on their table, it generally tends to affect the quality of even healthcare that individuals tend to get. If countries don't have money, economies can't run, individuals can't survive. So tourism, all those other aspects of the economy are not small things. I won't be taking any more POIs. Okay, so secondly, right, we'll have further elaboration on arguments such as different levels of prioritization. What does this mean, right? And we're not saying that this is how it should be, but we're saying this is how it is. Currently, we have states such as Kenya going into an election, and hence that's the priority of the, let's say, the political atmosphere that currently exists, right? So to that extent, those countries are going to be very against policies that are going to infringe on, for example, movement, or going to infringe on any electoral process that's likely to occur in those states, right? So to that extent, what is the impact, right, of imposing or creating certain strategies that are going to go against national interests, right? We think that any policy that's going to be implemented in this debate today, right, has to have the future goal of integration, right? And what does that mean? It means that if you hamper integration in any form of way, right, it means that you're retrogressively going against a lot of like objectives that the EAC is for. What does that mean, right? We saw when the United Kingdom walked out of Brexit, that when the United Kingdom walked out of the EU Brexit, right? We think that was one of the largest political moves that's ever been made in the EU, and we think that's because the United Kingdom no longer had its interests sought, for example, by the EU because of the EU imposing mandatory policies that the UK in itself didn't necessarily have in favor, right? So they said we don't want immigrants, but if we have to have immigrants, and if you have to be in the EU, it means we have to have immigrants. It means that we're likely to withdraw, right? We think that imposing factors that are going to infringe so severely on the sovereignty of individual states, right, means that you're going to increase the hesitancy or not even the aggression towards states pulling out or not necessarily being as integrated in the EAC. So we think for future development and stability of the EAC, you can't have such an aggressive stance that's going to push states away. Thank you.
Honorable judges, may it please this house, I go by the name Ian Ruto from the Republic of Kenya, and I'm currently in my second year at Moi University. The motion of today reminds me of the ancient saying, no man is an island. This takes me directly to Article 118 of the East African Community Treaty, subsection A, which talks about health. And I would like to directly quote, allow me, Your Honors. With respect to cooperation in health activities, the partner states undertake to take joint, mark that word, to take joint action towards the prevention and control of communicable and non-communicable diseases, to control pandemics and epidemics of communicable diseases. Now, COVID-19.
Point. Does joint action have to be in the form of this uniform policy, or can it be through shared objectives and goals?
Through uniformity of the states in response to such, yes. To Article 5, Sub-Article 1 of the East African Community Treaty. What, with regards to the objectives, what if we surrender our sovereignty as the East African Community states to a superior body? This is the East African Community. To respond to this issue, we will hereby resolve, most probably resolve to come up with the appropriate solution to tame this disease. With regards to health as my topic, health, COVID-19 brought about restrictions in the East African Community region.
Point.
With regards to movement, just a minute.
Might I, upon that subject, remind you that the East African community is still at the point of cooperation and not at the point of the surrendering of sovereignty, as you seem to so problematically imply.
Oh, I'll answer your question. Before I hand it over to my colleague, you're from Uganda. You have used several approaches to tackle COVID-19. Has COVID-19 been fully tamed in your jurisdiction? Is it on the rise? That's the question you need to answer first. Then we shall proceed. My point is that we should surrender this to a superior body. This is the East African Community in which we ratified to, which as Uganda you ratified to the treaty in 1999. So with regards to health, COVID-19 has been on the rise and it has brought about restriction in movements, etc., etc. And with it came the COVID-19 vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine, in that you cannot travel out of your jurisdiction or country without the COVID-19 vaccine. If we provide a uniform approach, a uniform strategy point for discussion today. Private sector, in that people in the East African region will be able to move and trade freely without restrictions from other jurisdictions, from the respective countries' authorities. And with that, having no further questions, I will beg to rest my case.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry, currently there are different strategies that are still being imposed, but there's still free movement. Why does a uniform policy exclusively bring the free movement that you talk about?
Basically, the East African community is an
And Nemo is not alive to the fact that to come to Uganda, she needs to take a COVID-19. That test, if it means that someone who cannot afford it, then cannot come to Uganda, who doesn't necessarily agree with it, that is restriction of movement, and we feel at that point that question cannot hold.
Any other question? Still 15 section 1.
Okay, so
Okay, I beg to rest my case. Thank you, honorable judges.
Good morning. I'm Mutagoma Sarah, the second attorney on the alternative side. Let's say in case we try to implement this uniform COVID-19 strategy in the East African community, have like EAC member states they don't develop vaccine, and neither are they financially good. We depend on financial aid. Say you're going to implement this strategy. Have you considered South Sudan, a country which is trying to like have all the vaccines for the people and they don't have enough funds to do that? That means that if we're going to have this uniform COVID strategy, they're just not going to be a consistent radio source of the COVID-19 vaccine for the people of the East African community. Another point where the first attorney said there are political differences. If you're going to put, for example, the lockdowns or the COVID restrictions, because there is the face mask. Oh, that one, oh yeah, we can do. But then, for the lockdown, Kenya is going. There are elections coming, and if there are elections, I won't say that I'm going to put the curfew 7 p.m. for Kenya and then Rwanda. I don't know how these people are going to deal with the fact that they're trying to have this uniform way, and Kenya is not trying to like adopt. So another thing I would like to say is the deepening division. You know, where you find out that the EAC, the Common Market Protocol says we're supposed to have a common, we're supposed to have one currency and also common market. We haven't even achieved that in the first place. How are we going to achieve this COVID-19 protocol where countries are they are trying to adopt the strategy that is being brought up, like the currency? How are they going to adopt this? This means that you will impose to a point that some East African countries would want to like further remove the membership in the East African community. You had a question? Okay, thank you. So I wish that, okay, for the alternative side, we don't know the different COVID status for different countries, and we do not share the daily records of how people are living in the East African community, the different restrictions that we have. It is nice that we should consider all those needed in the first place before we think of adapting to the uniform. We should consider, like she said, the tourism, where our economic growth goes on. For example, South Sudan, they depend on crude oil. We have many differences of bringing in the economic growth, like all those activities.
This is a health issue which triumphs every other issue that might come in. So we don't think that nationalism can come to an issue of health which affects every other country.
Oh, thank you. I talked about financial aid. We might get aid from the Britain. We might get aid from the United Arab Emirates. We're not connected. That means that if we're bringing in vaccines, I don't know the case for your country, you might not get the enough vaccines for the whole East African community, depending on how like the sources of the vaccines, as I was saying, because we're not that financially good. So yeah, so.
Honorable judges, honorable alternative strategy team, and the entire House, my greetings to all of you. My name is Nabil James Madit from South Sudan, and I am the second Secretary General on the affirmative team. Today is a very important day for all of us because we are discussing the substance of integration, the substance of unity as East African community. And this is being brought about by the motion that says this House believes that East African community member states should implement a single uniform COVID-19 response strategy. And I stand to present my arguments on economic benefit and trade in the region. What I would like to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that COVID-19 uniform strategy will have a lot of benefits in the region because take an example of a country like Uganda. Uganda right now is being blocked from transporting its goods, and people are not moving to Rwanda because Rwanda has restrictions that cannot allow some goods to come from Uganda. If we have a uniform strategy, a country like Rwanda will be prohibited from applying some restrictions on Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, we think on the affirmative team, this is not a question of a policy. This is the question of substance and how this particular COVID-19 uniform response strategy is able to benefit the region. Because with that, you will have Ugandans travel to Rwanda, they will travel to Kenya, they travel to Tanzania without any restrictions because the policy will have to be applicable to all the member states. Ladies and gentlemen, by mitigating fundamental impacts on COVID-19 on vital economic and social sectors like micro businesses, what do I mean? Countries like Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan have a lot of small scale businesses. When you limit movements of people, you cannot transport goods from other countries into your domestic country. I will take a point from you, Mr. Edru. Well, we have just mentioned that as the affirmative team. Politics aside, health supersedes politics because if you describe the issues of politics are more internal than health because health, we are protecting the health of the people and the health of the businesses that we have in our own countries. So we would like to inform the alternative team that while you try to argue on issues of politics, you should be very critical that health of our businesses and the people is the most important thing in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to rebut the recent speaker that has just left the space. She mentioned that South Sudan as a country is relying predominantly on crude oil. And then when you try to apply this COVID-19 uniform strategy, countries like South Sudan are going to suffocate economically. I would like to disagree fundamentally on this particular point, because look, any particular country. I'll take your point. So the alternative team needs to understand that what we are discussing here is a question of substance and the benefits that we are able to get once we have a uniform COVID-19 strategy. Article 2 of the East African Community Customs and Union, it speaks about the need to remove border tariffs. How do you remove border tariffs? When you remove border tariffs, you are able to allow goods and services to flow and people to flow in and across the countries, in the region. But then again, if you don't have a uniform strategy, South Sudan will decide not to allow Ugandans to travel to its boundary. Then what will happen? The businesses in Uganda that rely on selling goods to South Sudan will be able to suffocate. But then with a uniform strategy, South Sudan will be regulated because they are a member of the East African Community, and they will have to be compelled by law that Ugandans have the rights to come and sell their own goods within South Sudan. Same thing applies to Tanzanians. Tanzanians may have currently chosen not to allow any COVID-19 restrictions. What does that indicate? By not allowing restrictions on COVID-19 within the country, then they are in one way implicating the members of other countries, because they move outside of the country. But then when we have a comprehensive strategy that is uniform in all the East African communities, we are able to compel countries like Tanzania to have one unified response that allows citizens within the country and citizens from other countries to move across the borders. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by telling the alternative team that we on the affirmative strongly believe that a uniform strategy on COVID-19 is something that the region must be able to recognize and truly accept beginning from today, because it's something that we as a region should prioritize. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, my Hodibo. My name is Garang. Garang Quote Lester is my name. I'm a delegate from the Republic of South Sudan, and I'm going to be the third Attorney General. So, panel, very important things you need to understand in contextualizing this debate. This debate, for every particular debate, there is a problem that the motion that is being affirmed is solving. The problem with an affirmative team that does not understand the problem in the debate is this. They are arguing for a policy that, one, they don't understand, the policy whose problem they also don't understand. This is what I mean. There is a problem-solution mismatch in the affirmative case. The affirmative team seems to be defending a policy that is going to encourage free movement. We don't disagree. The policy that we expected is a policy that is going to respond to COVID-19. What is wrong? What did COVID-19 bring? One of them is the restriction of movement. The other was the reduction in the economic growth. The other was the death and spread of the disease around the entire region of East Africa. Those were the things that came from COVID. A strategy that is aimed at reducing the spread of COVID, a strategy that is aimed at increasing vaccination rates, a strategy that is aimed at also increasing the information access about COVID-19 is a strategy that the affirmative team should have affirmed. The motion suggests a uniform strategy across the East African community. The alternative team suggests a different strategy, which I've come to bring. Now, the team that will win this debate is a team that will show that the strategy that we bring will first, like I said, will achieve the aims, of a response strategy, which is reduce the spread of COVID-19. Second, to increase vaccination rates. Third, to increase a robust economic recovery. And maybe fourth, for a robust testing and reporting of COVID-19. Assuming these are the aims of the response strategy. If these are the aims, any strategy in the East African community that is tailored at achieving these aims without bringing in any other side effects that are detrimental to the community and the integration of the community would be the strategy that any team should stand to defend. The problem with a uniform strategy is one, it does not guarantee that the respect for the differences will be in place. Pano, it is very detrimental to impose a strategy that is not cognizant of the differences in one, the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the different countries. Second, the economic differences in terms of response. And third, the priorities of countries. You see, Honorable Nimo was here telling you that, you see, countries have different priorities. At the time at which we speak Kenya, the priority of Kenya is to see that the elections are successful. In countries like Uganda, which is about to open schools after over 70-something weeks, the priority is to see that kids go back to school safely and also attain their education. In some countries like South Sudan that lost 6.6 a GDP growth rate, the strategy is to recover economically and grow economically. Those are the different strategies. A strategy that does not respect all these differences is a strategy that we cannot respect. I'll take you a little. So, Pano, so what do we say? The team of the alternative is bringing a strategy that respects all these differences, but has the same aims. What are the aims? One, reduce the spread. Two, increase vaccination. Three, increase access to information about the COVID-19 vaccine. Fourth, to also recover economies from the shock that has been reduced by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is why the strategy here is better, because one, it respects that countries have different growth levels economically. Countries have different implications of COVID-19. We cannot argue that I'll take you a little. We cannot argue that the implication or the death rates across all the East African states are the same. But those differences were created by the differences in one, the priorities, differences in the economic standards. And for any strategy, these differences must be respected. And if a strategy does not respect them, it is bound to fail. And I will show you after this point.
Okay. My first question to you will be, do priorities of states exist in a state of emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic, where lives are at stakes and economies are experiencing outflows?
Thank you. You see, the problem with that is that by the time you impose a state of emergency, what you have acknowledged is that there is a priority that demands COVID-19. The East African community response strategy is not a uniform strategy that this team wants to argue. It is a strategy premised on Article 8, which encourages states to bring out policies that are actually supporting the objectives of the East African community, which objectives are entailed in Article 5. So what that simply means in simple English is this, that Article 5 of the treaty that established the East African community has objectives of the East African community, and every country should enact policies that are going to assist all the countries across the East African community to achieve those objectives. Why that was enacted is that countries are different, impacts are different, contexts are different, even sometimes economic growth are different. And until these differences are recognized by any strategy is bound to fail. In my final 15 seconds, this is why this team loses the debate. One, they come and say, you see, we are going to defend a uniform strategy. And then the very first speaker says, you see, our strategy is actually going to be similar. Now, the difference between uniform and similar is an English difference that this team has not yet highlighted, but we shall assume they don't have the difference. And if they don't have the difference, the strategy that is based on uniformity without cognizance of difference in context, economic growth, is bound to fail, and it has failed. Thank you.
think, so when you have the uniform response, three things happen. The first thing is, for instance, that we know that the impacts of COVID-19 are not really just because of COVID-19, but it's because of how weak our systems were even before COVID-19. Because understand, the private sector was not anyway like better off. People were still in debt. We had like different ratios of women. More women who were in the private sector were just like in those funny jobs selling tea, more like in the informal sector. And when COVID-19 happened, because of those barriers, what happened is that since there is a curfew, that means if most women are just doing those small businesses and curfews at 7, so they're more affected, right? So there are many examples. Well, the point is that the problem is not just about COVID-19, the problem is structural. So how do you solve this and how do you have this response? Does the response look like how these guys assume that we're going to talk about people and no countries? Not really. The response can also be structural. That is to say, we have to recognize that the problem was in our structures. For instance, we had a weak health system. That means we should improve, perhaps invest in more. That can be one response. The second response can be, we recognize we had like imbalances in gender, and as such, we should include like more women, incentivize them to come to that. But the other response could be that we have seen locusts coming in the pandemic, locusts in Uganda in the other side. That means that climate change could be another issue that is coming up, right? So how do we prepare for it? That could also be a response, because if climate change happens, Honorable Chair, imagine how many youth are on the street and tomorrow Kampala is flooded with those floods, right? You see how the same impact of COVID or blocking business and ETC could still happen. So therefore, this means then the response is simple. One, we need to start digitalizing our economies. But therefore, that means that our youth in future, whether COVID comes back, whether climate change comes back, they're able to trade online. So all those barriers are solved. But beyond that, we need to engage still more on removing the tariff and non-tariff barriers. And this responds to the issue of Kenya and Uganda, where some products are being blocked, because the argument is that those products are blocked for two reasons. One, because the standard is not the same, your maize is poor. But number two, the argument was that we want to protect our local economies. And this is what these guys want to advance. We don't think that's the spirit of integration. If we were to talk about integration, but at the same time say, we have different priorities as countries, so we should move those priorities, then we shouldn't be here wasting time. That can't be the spirit of integration. You can't say you want to integrate, but somehow we have national priorities, we don't think that's really the spirit. So therefore, this means that this entire team, we could forgive them, or perhaps understand it, but they really lack the basics of what the spirit of integration is. I would take.
Before you mislead us, the problem that you're trying to solve is integration, which can be solved by common market protocols and policies. That's not a COVID issue. That's completely separate. So defend how you're going to have a uniform COVID policy, not one to remove tariffs and barriers.
I've gotten you. So the problem, they're saying I'm trying to solve the problem of integration. If that wasn't an issue, then why would we even be here debating? That is an impact. But beyond that, the problem I'm solving is structural, because we need to think visionally, understand that the problems that we're facing of how many women and those disparities and how like we have very many cases, because we have structural problems even before. Because understand, imagine if we had like no COVID-19, would you be proud of the private sector the way it was before? What COVID-19 therefore did was simply exacerbate the already existing problems. So the question is, how do you solve it? Do you solve it by thinking myopically on just issues of vaccine and ETC, or do you solve it by thinking long-term and visionary, like how we are, by solving those pre-existing problems? That's the discussion in this debate. So we think on all those grounds, given the background I've given to you of how East African community thinks on the level of visionary, and being that we don't think these guys lose the debate. So we think the entire team, from the Secretary General, they need to recognize their priorities. We cannot accept, like, I mean, the entire team, from the alternative team, the leader, all Attorney Generals, the issues they try to engage really are trivial. And to that extent, Honorable Speaker, we've shown to you exclusively how we don't just give you the economic benefits, but we solve the structural problems as a way. The response is as well as structural, and we think that solves all those barriers. We're able to have a better integrated. But beyond that, if any pandemic shows up like climate change, we shall be able to still stand it, because our economies will have been digitalized, so you won't have to suffer so much. Thank you so much.
My name is Ayan Mabeklang from the Republic of South Sudan. A very good afternoon to you all. Well, a very long saying that says that there are very many ways to kill a rat. I say this referring to our motion for today that states that there should be a single uniform COVID-19 strategy vaccine. Okay, to start with, all the states of the East African communities, they're all having goals. And what are these goals? Ever since the vaccine came in, we faced the issues of decline in the economy of these states. We have the movement across borders have really decreased. We have things to do apparently, and when the vaccine was introduced, the rate of the people being vaccinated is still really low. Yes. Now the goals that we want to achieve as the East African community members are achieving increased cross-border movement, 1. 2, increased economy that had declined, increased vaccination and test and reporting cases of COVID-19. How do we do this? The former speaker from the alternative side said all this, but the problem is from the affirmative, they are saying that the single uniform strategy can solve this, which we completely don't agree with. Because in case we are to impose the same rules in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi, we all believe that this cannot work for it. For example, in South Sudan, the lockdown is not really so serious like that. Face mask is not a must in our country. I believe also in Tanzania. But unlike in Uganda, where testing is compulsory at the airport at your arrival, we believe that testing is compulsory here in Uganda. In case we apply this to all these airports of all these member states, will that really solve it? Yes, please.
You haven't explained how we can achieve cross-border movement without uniformity.
Yeah, I saw that coming and I'm coming to the point. Thank you. In fact, I think I should just answer you. The thing is, for example, reduce spread of the virus. How do we do this? For example, in Kenya, I think Kenyans are about to have the elections. So now these campaigns, how are the campaigns going to move on? Yet we are saying that there should be lockdown in all these countries, if that is the rule. Yes, please.
We told you we cannot continue.
You can repeat it again.
National interests and national politics over integration.
What is the guarantee that at this moment that the lockdown is not the rule that they've given? Thank you. In other words, I'm saying economy. The economy recovery. Now, this economy in South Sudan, we are having crude oil that we are relying on. Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, they're having their tourism as mostly the backbone of the economy. Now, if they say that lockdown is to be imposed in all these countries, how is it going to favor us? How is it going to favor these countries that are having tourism as their background for the economy? And like South Sudan, for the case of testing and reporting of cases, if schools are to be opened, I believe this can solve it. It should be put that it's compulsory for every school that is opening that kids or students should go for COVID-19 testing. And also we need to know that we have different intakes in all these universities of different states. If we say that testing is compulsory this weekend or next Monday, that doesn't mean that in Uganda we're having schools that are opening this month, because the schools might be open here and other countries are having holidays for their students. So I believe that can solve the issue of testing and reporting of cases. Increased cross-border movement can be, how can this be done? Anyone that is traveling can go for the test for the COVID-19. Anyone that, and we all believe that here, as we are all here, it's not that everyone should travel to Uganda at once if they impose that. I don't think that's the case. And then another thing is, the former speaker spoke of the digital economy. We all believe that in all these East African countries, we have areas that do not access internet. That's one. We have areas that do not have all this. Thank you. We have areas that do not have all the knowledge to go for this economy or for the business you're talking about. Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you so much. My question to you is, don't you think by lacking uniform response to COVID-19 is a source of inequalities, or rather broadening the already existing inequalities in East African community?
Okay, I beg your pardon.
I'll repeat. My question to you is, don't you think the non-existence of uniform policies, or rather uniform measures to control COVID-19 is a way of broadening the effects, or rather is a way of broadening the existent inequalities in East Africa?
Think this the single uniform can solve all these measures. Are you listening to me? Okay.
Uzalendo pia mshikamano viwe msingi wa umoja wetu. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the second stanza of our EAC anthem. My name is Esther Wambui Gitau, and I am from Kenya. Today I am appearing as the friend of the house. I shall be rebutting the argument of the fourth Attorney General, and secondly, I shall be substantiating and affirming the argument of our very able chairperson. To front this argument, I shall advance on the grounds as follows: that there is need for uniform COVID-19 response in this manner. We need uniform containment measures. We do not mean lockdowns. That is so basic. We do not mean curfews. That is also so basic. What we mean is we need to have uniform management of mobility, uniform management of measures that we are taking. For instance, I'll take you later. If we look at organizations such as the WHO, when they declared COVID-19 pandemic, when they declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, this is what they said: wear face mask. They did not mean wear blue face mask, just wear a face mask. So when you tell us that when we initiate lockdown, we mean Kenya, Uganda lockdown, go home 9 p.m. No, that is not what we are saying. Secondly, when we talk about uniform response to COVID-19, the measures, we mean we need to strengthen our health systems. Talking from my country, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, we did not have these health facilities. People were there confused. You do not know where to go to. And the institution that you're being told to go to, you cannot afford. Therefore, what we resolved to was taking home remedies.
Point.
Yes.
So is one half of your house implementing lockdowns and the other one implementing different colors of face masks?
Thank you. Nobody is implementing lockdown. Nobody is implementing face masks to be the same color. What we are saying is we need uniform containment measures. If we say, as the East African community, this is what we want to do, let's move as a regional bloc. It is very clear that we are having differences in this response. For example, when we traveled to come here, we had our test for COVID-19. We are already in Uganda. We had another COVID-19 test. Does that mean there's uniformity? There's no uniformity, because if the test in Kenya was the same to that in Uganda, then we should have saved a lot of money.
Okay, Honorable Esther is arguing in some ideal world, but I'd like to answer this. Do you think there is any East African country that doesn't have measures responding to COVID? Does
Pardon?
it exist? Is there any East African community member state that doesn't have any measures in response to COVID? Because that's what you seem to be saying.
Thank you. What I am saying is that, let me recognize this. Member states of East Africa have their responses to COVID-19, but this house today is saying these measures are existent, but non-effective, and we need to merge them. We need them to be the same so that we are not having, they need to be the same so that we are not having these inconveniences and all these battles. I don't know, this silent wars that we're experiencing between countries. And then the economic vulnerability that was addressed by our third speaker. There is need for uniform COVID-19 response to overcome the economic vulnerability. The alternative side has really quoted South Sudan. We do not contest that, but being in this regional bloc, it means that we are working in accordance to our stanza in the anthem. We want to help you people. And that's why we are saying we need this uniform measure. So if we say that we are going to have COVID-19 vaccination, and Mark, I have not said mandatory. So if we are going to have COVID-19 vaccination, we are going to lobby as the East African community in a way that South Sudan will not bring any complaints of being unable to financially sustain the COVID-19 vaccination. Lastly, as a friend of the House today, the affirmative team proposes uniform COVID-19 responses on the following grounds: that we need to have communication, or rather risk communication and community engagement. For example, the WHO required that states give a report on the number of infections and how far they are going. But we have seen East African community states, some of them withdrawing and not giving out the information regarding to the infection rates. Secondly, with the emerging Omicron, it is of necessity that we have this risk communication. For example, in Kenya, give out the information of the COVID infection rates so that, or rather what I mean is, if Kenya in itself is not taking the necessary measures to curb, then it means we are putting the life of our friends in Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, name them all, at risk. Secondly, there's need to strengthen the region's capacity for COVID-19 surveillance. That is where the problem is. Thank you. Where the problem is the surveillance and the reporting of all key, or rather the reporting of COVID-19 infection rates at the key border points. That goes back to the point I said, where some East African community partner states are withdrawing information pertaining to the infections rate, pertaining to the measures they are taking, and it is like we are all in the dark regarding what is happening in the partner states. Thank you.
My name is Karikumutima Leicester, and I'll be speaking as the 5th Attorney General from Burundi. I'd like to underline a point before getting to my point. We are not promoting the diversity of our priorities in our respective country, but we could have instead an approach of coordination in COVID-19 responsive plan, without requiring to a uniformity response plan, which is the case of European Union. Integration substance must exist on understand, as in we have different reliance on different sectors. Also, we have different health amenities. Before implementing the uniformity in COVID-19 responsive plan, you should know that Rwanda have not the same health amenities like Burundi or Uganda. That's why each state established update national COVID-19 vaccine targets and plans. Also, it would be not wise in the future to implement a uniform COVID-19 strategy while you are not giving EAC partner state to pursue their own interest. We have to notice that some EAC partners have collaboration with other countries for their own economic achievement. We don't have the same growth economic levels. I'll take you.
Yeah, I think the problem is when people don't understand the difference between same and similar. That is to say, let's say about percentages. If we say there's need to invest 10% like of the resources in internet infrastructure, doesn't mean you have like incentivied discount.
Thank you. I'd like to just respond to that. You see, same and similar in the context of policy making and implementation are not different. The difference would only exist if you made it clear you failed. And because you failed, we'll tell you that the similar or uniform would mean that the same policies are applied on the same countries, regardless of context. And that's particularly problematic. Thank you.
I'll take you later. I was saying that some of EAC partner states have collaboration with other countries for their own economic achievement. For example, Burundi has recently collaborated with the United States Emirates Arab, and that states have to ensure that collaboration regardless of the regardless of the without forgetting, like of collaboration allows private sectors to benefit, enhance credibility and visibility of social responsibility and access to new market suppliers. As I'm concluding, responsive COVID-19 responsive plan of EAC plan agreed on cooperation and collaboration in sharing information. They never stated uniformity in COVID-19 responsive plan. Thank you.
When you are preparing for a debate in the alternative, you always assume what the government is going to say. And that is how you structure your argument. You fail on the fact that you do not respond if they have different understanding of the motion. And that is what we had today. The alternative's assumption today was we are going to have lockdown for Rwanda. All of you go to sleep at 7 p.m. That is uniform. That is their assumption. They also assumed that we are going to say that, let's say, curfew. We are also going to say get vaccines every day. That Ugandan parliament, you have to get a vaccine every time you have to go. Then they also meant that all of you in wherever country, vaccine testing, COVID testing every day. And we feel that was flawed, dear panel, and we cannot consider it. We said that recovery, COVID response, in this regard means recovery, that if we must recover, there should be a response. We told you what the problem was, that there could be structural problems, and therefore response could be in a structural way. We also told you that we could have a regional task force, dear panel, coordinating all activities of mobilization, coordinating activities of surveillance, coordinating activities of mobilization in all different East African countries. That means a uniformed strategy, dear panel. And when they miss out on that, I think Odero needs to do a better job. Now, panel, when they advance arguments of sources of revenue, we all agree that these sources of revenue have been heavily impacted by the COVID-19. And that is why there's the greatest need of having a recovery that is uniform, dear panel, that will understand that Kenya has been greatly affected. Rwanda has been greatly affected. That if we come together and join forces, we'll have the capacity that they are talking about. Their next argument was capacity, dear panel. If the argument was capacity, there would never be integration, because Uganda with its struggling GDP, Kenya that is doing good, there is no need for us being on the same table. What is the point, dear panel? The point is that even in our different strengths, we can come together and help each other, and that is what we call integration. So when we talk about joint recovery, joint response plan, it means that when Sudan cannot access vaccinations, we can come together and have capacity to go and get vaccinations and give to South Sudan and give to Rwanda and give to Kenya and give to Tanzania, dear panel. And when they miss out on those points, we feel like they did injustice. And they also come and ignore the framework and also go to specifics. And we feel that is injustice to a debate when you go to specifics and ignore the broader picture, dear panel. Moving forward, they talk about different priorities. That priorities will always exist, dear panel. But what is the greater good? You cannot go beyond priorities. Their priorities are on regards to politics, that Museveni thinks schools should not go to school. That is their understanding of priorities. We feel it is flawed that if Museveni thinks schools, President Museveni, apologies, if he thinks that people should not be going to school because of COVID-19, that is politics. Why are people in Tanzania going to school, dear panel? We feel if we had a joint recovery, then we would have an objective understanding of these problems and therefore better response and better recovery. What do we tell you to this house, dear panel? We tell you about risk communication, that there is need to communicate, even with different languages, dear panel. That is the whole point of integration, that we have different languages, but still come up and sit together as a bond. I will take all of you.
Sharon.
Now, we talk about one regional task force, dear panel, and that was very important, that we can coordinate activities in Tanzania, in Kenya, and all these other different countries. We are telling you about the relevance. Why is it very important that we do such a thing? And when they talk about priorities, they talk about sources of revenue and talk about the economy, they are ignoring the greater good of this debate, and that is the necessity and the need, dear panel. They talk about the nature of the EAC. We have already told you that all of them have different capacities and the greater need to come together, dear panel. And we tell you that if it's about the nature of EAC, that countries that have come to kind of close to a joint response plan, for example, the EU, they have better results. We also ask them in a POI that how do you do the something and expect different results? We do not get an answer. They expect that Uganda will go in its Uganda and do whatever Uganda is doing and raise beyond 2.8 for over 2 years vaccination rate. We feel that is flawed. They think that Tanzania can continue doing the same thing as they are and achieve 2.6 vaccination rate for 2 years. We also feel like that cannot happen. What if Ugandans what if we come together as EAC and agree that we have vaccination, combined effort? It would mean that we would have a greater chance of hitting 99% vaccination at a shorter time compared to when we would have Uganda doing it alone and all these other countries doing it on themselves. Yes.
Engage with the fact that the task force and all these things you talk about exist in both sides of the house. You have not addressed why specifically this task force would implement a single unified strategy, not coming together.
You are assuming that unified strategy means stringent. You also talked about fallout, that we are going to impose this. You only agree to some things, dear panel. We are talking about whether you should or whether you shouldn't, dear panel. We tell you why it is very important for us to have this debate. We also tell you why COVID-19 specifically, I have already assessed for you. And the third question is in regards to key for trade, that this recovery, these economies have been hinged a lot by COVID-19, and a recovery plan means working together to recover the economies and therefore developing the private sector, but also recovering the different economies in their different strengths in the different countries, dear panel. When they say that they already have that to end, we do not understand what they mean, that they already have that to end, unless Edoru comes and gives us a better stand. With that, I beg to propose.
Dignitaries present, ladies and gentlemen, I am Stephen Martin Edoru from the Alternative Strategy Team, a Ugandan. Sharon's speech was critical because she spoke about injustices. If there's been any injustice to this debate, it has been the word games that the affirmative team has tried to play. They talk about same, similar, uniform. They use them interchangeably as if they mean the same thing, while at the same time seem to imply that they mean different things. Permit us note that just because we have regional task forces does not mean the regional task forces will agree on what measures should be undertaken. Permit us also point out that just because we have centralized systems of information gathering does not mean the information will be used the same way. The affirmative team was supposed to tell us why, upon the gathering of information, it must be used in the same way. Okay, let us give the Secretary General benefit of the doubt, similar or uniform, depending on which word you prefer. We think that that has been a very misconstrued perspective of debate, and it has taken us off what we're supposed to be discussing. To Mr. Mutunji's response that regional matters are more important than national interest, permit us remind him that integrations are only sustained by the appeal to and satisfaction of national interests. Wherever there is a violation of national interests, you cannot have or sustain a regional integration. It is impossible. So you cannot make the argument that national interests are irrelevant and immaterial to regional integration, because whenever those national interests are not addressed, the regional integration will fundamentally fail. That is a basic stance of regional integration. That's a very important point. To the responses or the arguments again made by Mr. Mutunjisa about the challenges between Uganda and Kenya, permit us remind him, and for this I'll just quote us to articles. I'll send them to Article 19 of the Protocol for the Establishment of the Customs Union that speaks about safeguard measures, which do not say that economies should just open up and accept trade. That provision specifically permits for a situation where if a country deems that there is a surge of imports within the economy in such a manner as is likely to harm national interests, they are justified in consultation with and information of other partner states to undertake measures to protect those interests. That is, those treaties are enshrined within the protocols that the team wants to defend. To the response, to the argument from Mr. James from South Sudan about the positions of, or the likelihood that South Sudan might, for example, just unilaterally refuse to accept Ugandans to move, permit us send him to Article 21 and 22 of the same protocol. Article 21 states, and I'll read for him, it prohibits actions that have as their object or as their effect the restriction and distortion of competition within the region. That Article 22 provides that regional states shall not use shall not use provisions that allow them to safeguard economies as measures and methods to restrict the free movement of goods within the region. That's Article 22 of the same protocol that they want to defend. Article 24, which is a very critical article, permits for the establishment of an East African Committee on Trade Remedies with the effect that if actions are going to be pursued by national countries, there must be consultation, there must be engagement at the regional level. These things are important, right? All those are arguments that we think are relevant. So we think we address the positions of those merely by quoting the protocols enshrined within that document. Please.
What if the consultation is done and everything is done, and the question now is, should we or should we not? I think
we have addressed that problem. We have said, assume you do the consultation, which is a viable approach. If then you disagree on what action you should undertake, because Mr. Mutunjisa says, well, for example, we should invest in ICT. Kenya has, for example, been able to invest in ICT because Kenya has a mushrooming number of startups. In 2020 alone, Kenyan startups that deal in the areas of agricultural technology and financial technology were able to close funding rounds worth 19 billion Kenyan shillings. This is not the same case in Uganda, whose startups have not been able to accrue that amount of money. So if the Kenyan government says our priority is to invest in ICT because we have a comparative advantage in ICT and startups that rely on technology, and Uganda does not have the same privilege, should then Uganda be compelled to have a similar investment in information communications and technology? We do not think not. We think that countries are still driven, even at the integration level, by comparative interests, by competitive advantages, and by national interests that the affirmative team thinks are irrelevant to this discussion. We think that that is a misconstruction of what this debate is.
Kindly points. Yes. Okay, thank you for your grace. I have two questions for you. On matters national interest, you do realize that the EAC communities at first focused on their national interest, which led to the disintegration of the East African community in the very beginning. Secondly, don't you think waiting for countries to attain the same GDP or standards is not, don't you think it's a wild goose chase?
Permit me refer the affirmative team again to the Treaty for the Establishment of the East African Community. That has a very important principle upon which this community is founded, the principle of asymmetry. A realization that countries are different and that we cannot impose positions on the East African community unilaterally. A recognition within the treaties that found the East African community that countries are different and that imposition of similar measures across the community can harm economies disproportionately. Those treaties are enshrined in the document. It is sad that the affirmative team, on top of playing word games, decided not to read these documents. We think that the treaties provide, first and foremost, for situations under which, with consultation with member states, provisions can be undertaken by these member states to protect economies. I've cited for you Article 19, Article 18 that speaks about countervailing measures, Article 24 that provides for the establishment of the East African Community Committee on Trade Remedies. All of these things permit for there to be actions that are not unilateral, but that are coordinated and collaborated. The idea that then therefore that countries will act unilaterally should be dismissed in this debate. The idea that countries will act in their own self-interest unilaterally should also be dismissed in this debate. We think we have demonstrated this sufficiently. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Warima Manyara from Kenya, and I'll be giving the reply speech for the negating side. So to begin with, right, I think it's clear to first of all have some form of clarity as to the stance in this debate, right? We think that in the past, right, the East African community has taken uniform stances, right? So in that case, I think we have some form of precedent of what uniform means, right? And what they try to bring to you. We think that when they passed motions to have a uniform passport, right, or a same passport, we think that in that case, we all had the same passport. They can't run away and come and tell us that they're going to implement things differently in different countries, because that's not uniformity in this case, right? So we think at the very core of what they've suggested, they're fundamentally wrong. Secondly, right, principle, another example, an issue that has been raised in a lot of economic blocks, right, are questions such as implementing, for example, a single currency system. What does this mean, right? It means that all states would have to then be able to use the same currency. It cannot fall that in this case, what they're telling you is you're going to use structural reasons that form behind behind getting the currency to then be able to come and implement those things, right? Those structural reasons, or to form task forces or to form panels, right? It's actual implementation that's going to impact all these states, right? So they can't run away from what uniformity is. And we think that if they try to run away, they haven't proven what is essentially their burden in this debate, right? But to continue. Secondly, right, I think what we get specifically coming in from the, what we get specifically coming in from the type of policy that they try to give us, right? We think that it would be very disingenuous in this debate, right, if we were to come and oppose custom systems that were to remove tariffs. We think that those are not COVID-19 recovery protocols, right? We don't think that those are, that's the unified response that they were supposed to defend in this debate, right? Secondly, we think it's also like very unjustified, right, and very uncharitable for them to not come and tell us, right, specific protocols that are being implemented in response to COVID. What do this look like in other states, right? This look like, for example, mandatory vaccine. No, this looks like, for example, vaccination. This looks like, for example, curfews. This looks like, for example, mask wearing, right? Why do we think they've run away from their burden, or why do we think that they've escaped the principal resolution that they were supposed to defend today, right? Because they agree with us as to why this is not necessarily possible and how this is not necessarily something that's going to be efficient within these states. Secondly, right, they try to tell us how, for example, health is a matter of priority, and I think we all agree in this debate, right? And we agree for two principal justifications. We agree with this because health generally affects the quality of life and it affects individuals, right? But I think we're also here today to discuss how COVID-19 in this case has affected the private sector, right? So there's an interdependence of sectors that generally tends to exist. Hence, health cannot be looked at in isolation without looking at the impact that it has not only on the economy and the impact that it also has on politics, right? So they can't tell us, for example, that we're going to implement policies and we shouldn't care how they're going to affect the economy, because we think in principle, health has affected the economy as we see with COVID, right? So when we tell you, for example, you can't implement policies that are likely to negatively impact economies of states, not only because they don't have the capacity, but they're just further going to devastate this country's capacity, right? We think that you have to engage that, and you can't run away from it by telling us health is important. Health is important because it targets all aspects of the economy, so engage with that, right? Lastly, they try to tell us about this issue of cross-border movement, right? We think that's pertinent, we think that's important, but however, we also think we get that on our end for two specific reasons, right? We think we get cross-border movement on our end because countries are able to sufficiently implement, not only according to their will, but also according to their capacity, COVID protocols that they think that they can be able to implement and that they are willing to implement. We think these two things are important because the minute you implement uniformity, right? We've told you about what happens specifically when states feel that they either take a mandate that they cannot handle or one that is imposed on them, right? I think we live in a world where we've seen the impacts of specifically Brexit on other economic blocks, right? We can't operate within a vacuum and think that whatever actions we give or whatever actions we actively do, right, are not going to have impacts towards the sustainability and towards the sustainability specifically of the economic block, right? right? And lastly, right, they tell you about inequalities. We think that what on their end they will do, right, is two things. Specifically, they will entrench inequality. Firstly, because they're going to impose things, right, in terms of uniformity on states which don't have the capacity. If you impose things specifically on South Sudan, for example, to have mandatory mask wearing or to, for example, have curfews, right, it means that they're going to have certain losses because of not being able to either work beyond certain hours, or they're going to have certain losses in the economy because they cannot be able to absorb certain losses that they had planned to absorb, right? So we think that what they will do will further entrench inequality, as opposed to their POI, which was simply how we'll have inequality on our end, right? Note, they've told us we'll have inequality, haven't explained the how. We've told you how we get inequality on their end of the house, right? Lastly, right, is on their whole policy that generally comes about how they're thinking about visionary and future responses, right? I think it would be very disingenuous today, right, if they'd force us to come and defend or be against climate change policies, if they were to come and force us to be against, for example, integration policies. We think that that's not what this debate is about, right? I think we asked Sharon a very strategic question. What she's suggesting is something like panels to discuss issues and everything, right? And we don't think that's an implementation of a uniform policy. So we think in the last 3 minutes that they have in this debate, right, they can at least try to clarify to us how they implement a uniform COVID strategy. That's not something that's going to look like coordination or whatever it is they've been trying to say in this debate. Thank you.
Judges, I think, I'm Mutungisa Edgar. Yeah? Yes, I'm Mutungisa Edgar from the Republic of Uganda. I think it's very important that you don't always cram the spirit of debates. So yesterday's debate was about mandatory vaccination and the principle was force. Today's debate, there's nothing like force. It's a policy that asks us whether we should or we shouldn't. So you understand how we are not violating anyone's national interests. But beyond that, the only way that argument can be held valid is if you prove that there is any nation in the community whose interest is, number A, COVID to continue, number B, those structural things to continue being problematic. If they can prove that there is any nation that is comfortable with them continuously to have those systematic barriers and, you know, in healthcare system, in not being digitalized, that is their interest, then they win on that audience. Because we think every country we have, it's in their best interest that they digitalize the economies, right? So we think really that argument cannot hold. But beyond that, we think it's not really fine and right, especially for attorney generals. The people expect to be honest when they recite very many articles and forget one that is important. Article 118, again, of our treaty, that talks about health, that gives us the mandate to consider like unified response systems, especially in terms of the pandemic. So what we are doing, we are proving that Article 118 on our side. When we implement that, that exactly is what our actions are like get not justified on that premise, right? But let's talk about this whole idea of national interest and etc. Because we find it feeble, but you know we have to respond to it. Now, it's important that for dear judges in this room to understand the impact of COVID-19 or those pandemics like climate change. The fact is that a problem in one country can be shared in other countries. That is to say, today you may have less cases of COVID because you're Uganda, and so you're saying, our interest, first we have less cases, but why should we implement with Rwanda that has many cases? The problem is that it spreads. Today you have less, tomorrow you have at you have more, you see? Same with problems like of climate change. For instance, let's assume you've said, you know, we have to be sovereign, and one country decides for us we shall cut forests, we shall practice deforestation, while for you on your end in Kenya, you're saying for us we are planting trees. The idea is that the impact of deforestation in Uganda will still cut across and still find you in Kenya. So when you understand that, then you recognize the need of uniformity, because without it, all your efforts become fertile. Let me give you just a simple example to bring this to light. So how does this look like? That's a clear picture. So let's say Uganda decides that we need to digitalize the economies. Uganda decides that we think, so that in case there is maybe another pandemic like climate change, we are not taken out by floods. But then Kenya decides, no, first we don't care about climate change, right? Let's cut the trees. Do you think the strategy of Uganda will be achieved at the end of the day? So that's how that cross-pollination of different harm becomes exacerbated. What that means, therefore, the whole interest they're talking about, we want tourism, we want all those things, in the long run end up also being taken away. Because how shall you have tourism? Today you think you have tourism when tomorrow the effects have cut across the entire region. Still the tourism you are trying to protect because you want to be nationalistic still goes away. So all that shows you how this principle of uniformity is very important. But I have to note that we are very sad that really attorney generals want to come and crash on an English definition of similar and the same. I won't engage on that, but you get the principle, I think, from the explanation we've given unto you, right? So then let's talk about the entire idea of what if you don't agree. We think it's important that when we come to this debate, perhaps don't just argue for the sake of arguing, because we think really, to be honest, the motion is should we, right? So you can't say, what if we've not agreed, should we fight? We are trying to justify for you the reasons that let's agree, right? But let me answer Theodore's question, not was with that feeble. So this is what happens if you don't agree. One, you violate Article 118 on that health protocol that requires you to act in a unified way in response to pandemics. But number two is that you violate the principle that it should be common knowledge that in regards to the interest of the regional interests should outweigh or should supersede your national interests. If that principle was not there, then you will never have integration. But beyond that, let me give you one example. Just here in EU, what made EU develop better or integrate better than any regional blocks is that same idea of uniformity. The fact that countries were more willing to cede some levels of sovereignty for the greater good. Therefore, the question then happens, who wins this debate? If you really plan to believe that in the spirit of integration, we should prioritize our national interests, right? And make them outweigh. If you think that's the right principle, then they win the debate. But if you think the principle is that we should prioritize the greater good over our individual interests, right, that still don't work, as I've shown to you, that could exacerbate into more harm in the future because of the nature of how these pandemics can cut across the entire globe, right, then that's why we win the debate. So it's up to you to judge on those premises. We think that is where that debate happens, and that's why you decide the person who wins that debate or who loses that debate, right? But then let's talk about the idea of sovereignty. Really, do countries have, do they have sovereignty? I think it's obvious. So the question in this debate, as already stated, is not whether you can or you can't. The question is, should you? You could have the potential, for instance, one analogy, maybe to clarify this issue. You know, you could have the capacity, for instance, you can bomb the entire world, right? You have the bombs. Then the question simply is, should you? So that you don't have the capacity. We agree that you have the capacity to be sovereign and prioritize our national interests. We are justified in doing that. The question is, should we, in the spirit of the pandemic and how severe and difficult it can be, as we will explain to you? I think the answer is obvious. We win this.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for yes, I want to congratulate the debaters who made it to today's round, and thank you for that very interesting debate and areas of recommendations. The beauty is that we have people within our midst that do sit on sectoral councils that are going to be receiving the outcomes of this debate, and hopefully they can adopt some of your recommendations. But before they do that, I will be welcoming two assessors, also experts in the ministries of the EAC, first from the United Republic of Tanzania, then from the Republic of Uganda. But before I do that, the judges are yet again excused to go and make a deliberation. Anita, if you could be so kind to guide the judges. But while at that, we are just going to have remarks from the two government officials, after which we shall break for lunch, then go back to our hotels of residence, change into our culture wear, and be back here by exactly 5 o'clock to start off our gala dinner. Also, to make some clarity, just because these people made it up here doesn't mean that all of them are ambassadors and the rest of the people who are in the audience are not. I think the response to that will be unveiled tonight when the Secretariat tells us what the outcomes of the judgment and what the judge's recommendations were. That said, the last administrative announcement is that there is a list for accommodation that needs to be signed, and we are short on 4 people. So for those of you who have not signed the accommodation list, there is no way the secretariat can account for you, which means that when you're checking out tomorrow, the hotel will be billing you. So we encourage that if you know you have not signed a list that had hotel on top of it, please go to the table there and sign that list with Barbara. I think 4 people are lacking. We would hate for you to have to pay for your accommodation. That said, I would like to welcome the Honorable Representative of the United Republic of Tanzania to just briefly give us her views and make her assessment of the debate.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's an honor to be here and to see the younger generation going in depth of issues which are happening around the globe and the issues which are not very good for the human race in this world, the pandemic, COVID-19, and also their in-depth understanding of issues of East African community. How does East African community work? Actually, I've got so many ideas which they are going to contribute to my work from how they were arguing against each other and the different issues which pertain. And since I have a responsibility of advising governments on how to move forward, so this has been very, very useful. I mean, the way they would go through the articles and understand what the constitution of East African community pertains. So congratulations for all. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday, but I believe everybody who participated in this debate has the capacity, the same capacity and more. So again, congratulations for all those who participated yesterday. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this event. It's very useful for the growth of our region, and also the judges who have been here tirelessly, who have to listen to word after word. Lastly, I would like to say thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasant, Entebbe is always beautiful, and bringing me back to my maternal side because my mother comes from Kibibi Butambara. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much from the representative of the United Republic of Tanzania. And now off to our host, Mr. Sembatia, to come and share his assessment comments on the debate.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thought I wouldn't make any comments today, but since it is a norm, let me make a few remarks. One, I wish to congratulate the team that has made it to this day's debate. I knew it was a tug of war getting to this level, and my casual assessment was not frustrated. Actually, the team I saw on the podium this morning is probably the team I expected, except for about 1-2 cases that did not make it. But for those of you who made it, congratulations. And I believe they are still screening, which I end up having again the best out of the best. You don't need to give up because I believe you're still very vibrant. Some of you could probably be in your first, second years of university, and probably, God willing, next year, you should make it now to the top. There are a few issues I wanted to put straight. One, uniformity, similarity. There's a colleague that attempted to distinguish them. Was it Mr. Martin Eduru? He attempted to show that there's a difference between uniformity and similarity. And that takes us to the concept of harmonization and approximation, because these are terms that we tend to use interchangeably and they tend to mean different things. In the EAC context, when we talk of harmonization, we are talking of uniformity. But when we talk of approximation, we are talking of similarity. Uniformity is something that is very hard to achieve generally. Generally, it is very hard to achieve. We believe because of the diverse backgrounds, socioeconomic and so on, uniformity is hard to achieve. So we tend to focus more on approximation. We agree to a national law, then we see how we can approximate with the view of seeing how we speak to that common regional law. So I wanted us to appreciate that better, that there is a difference between uniformity and similarity. And it is in that context that we have harmonization and approximation. Subservience of national interests as against regional interests. Of course, this is something I also tried to allude to yesterday. And we said, under the spirit of Article 84 of the treaty, that regional laws, policies, and directives tend to take precedence over national laws. The reasoning is very simple, that before we come up with the regional law, there are various consultations. It's a very long trajectory that we tend to follow. There are consultations, we validate, and in the process, we try to harmonize, we try to come up with almost similar positions. So for example, if you're talking about the immigration law at a regional level, or the regional policy on management of refugees, we undertake a study. After that, we validate in each individual partner state. And at the end of the day, we come up with something we feel tries to consider or take into consideration the interests of individual partner states. So there are consultations that normally take place before we come up with a law at a regional level. And in so doing, when partner states individually agree to that regional law, then that regional law is considered to be supreme to the national laws. That is the basis. It takes a bit of a longer trajectory to come up with a national law, and that makes it not necessarily superior, but because we have acceded, we have accepted, we have acknowledged the fact that it is a superior regional law, then we accept and tend to make our national laws subservient of sorts to the regional law. I don't know whether that is a bit clear now. You had a hand, madam? You want to question an assessor? That would be a little strange, but if you're sharing something, it's okay. You can go ahead and. Yes, madam. Is it Sharon? Yes. Chambogo University? But we are not in a debate, eh? And whatever I'm saying is not supposed to prejudice. That's why the judges are out of this room, for purposes of not prejudicing what they want to decide. And we're only saying whatever we're saying specifically because we think it can help you or the subsequent generations to come. Yes, Madam Sharon. Yes.
Or what happens in the event that one partner state feels that even after consultation and the surveys and everything, they still cannot agree? What then happens? Thank you.
That is a very brilliant idea. And this is an issue that we have been grappling with at a regional level. But of course, that argument has its roots in the nature of international law. International law by its nature is soft law. It depends on the goodwill. I know most of you are students of international law generally. So when we talk of international law, it is generally not justiciable. You cannot enforce it generally. You can't say, like we have the penal code in Uganda, and you say when you kill someone, you're supposed to be sentenced to death or life in prison. Under international law, we cannot have such. But what we are currently doing at the EAC region is to come up with a sanctioning regime. When we talk of a sanctioning regime, we are saying in case of any breach of a provision in the treaty, then such and such penalties should apply. But to explicitly answer your question, when you agree, the presumption is by goodwill, you should comply. Because the moment you agree and ratify and deposit the instrument of ratification, then you are expected. Please mark my words. You see, generally lawyers tend to be very selective when they are using their words. So you are expected to be bound. You are expected to respect. I don't know whether, Sheldon, I'm trying to answer your question. So in much as there's that ideal, it does not necessarily or ordinarily follow that you are expected by force to comply with it. Why? Because international law is generally soft law, and it depends on the goodwill of a particular state. So in reference to the debate that has been going on, yes, you can accept to come up with a common policy on the containment of COVID. But in much as you may have that common policy at a regional level, it does not necessarily follow that you are at all material times expected to comply with it. That is the problem, the general problem with international law. Have I answered you, madam? You're a student of what? What is that nutrition? I've had nutrition. Diet. I will consult you. Anyway, that's what I specifically want to put across. But generally now, you know, personally, I have a thinking that in whatever we do, we should continue being structured. We should continue acting in a predictable manner. So going forward as youth ambassadors in the EAC, what is it that we can do? I've engaged Mr. Segawa on several occasions during his tenure. And my humble plea has always been, can we be more structured in our interventions? So going forward, I've a few comments that I wanted to put across for the benefit of each one of us. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense for us as youth ambassadors to come up with very brilliant ideas and they only die at the date of at their inception. They should be carried forward. They should form regional action plans, and we go ahead and implement and ensure that we achieve all the desired outcome. So in my view, I feel as youth, we should continue being courteous and we should be as humble as possible. Yes, we have very brilliant ideas. Some of us speak. I had a lecturer in Makerere in my years, so many years ago, who used to say, yes, when it comes to speaking, you find university students in the street on at campus. You might feel, these ones have come from London. But when it comes to writing, no, it becomes terrible. But I believe for you, you did the writing first. Then when it came to presentation, you're also doing so well. But now that other component of being humble, being courteous in whatever you do, to me is very critical. When you approach those big offices, because some of you will get an opportunity of going even up to your respective principals, the presidents, how do you behave? How do you conduct yourself? It doesn't cost you a thing to be humble, in my view. So as a take home, I'm advising and appealing to you to continue with that level of humility that you have depicted today during the presentation. Please be humble, be courteous. 2, continuously engage. Let us not get tired. You know, there is that disease of capture. In administration, they call it capturing. Or mazeyo, in Uganda, we call it okumalayo, that you have finished it all. When you are appointed a youth ambassador, you feel you're on top of this planet Earth. Nobody should talk to you. Nobody should bother you. You should not continue engaging your colleagues. As youth ambassadors, we expect you to go to your respective universities. And you're not stopped to say, for example, in Uganda, if you're from Nkumba University, you're not stopped from causing an engagement in Makerere University or Mbarara University or Guru University and so on and so forth. Your ambassadorial obligations do not restrict you to your particular university. Please continue engaging the youth. The purpose of establishing this platform is to ensure that we use you and we exploit all your potentials. And like I said in my opening remarks yesterday, we already have a deliberate program as Uganda and specifically the Department of Political and Legal Affairs to engage youth. So whoever is part of this platform, continue engaging us, continue doing your work and meticulously executing your obligations. Presentation. Is that one writer, I think is called Shakespeare, who said that it is the attire that makes a man. So kindly, how you present yourself to me is very critical. And I applaud whoever appeared on this platform today. There has been a tremendous improvement in terms of how you're appearing today, vis-a-vis how we have appeared today. How we appeared yesterday and how we have appeared today. There is a slight or good improvement and a remarkable one at that. So kindly keep it up. Be good people. That Shakespeare was a very important man. It's only in Uganda where one person said that for us, we are dealing with scientists because they provide remedies to problems. But these artsy people have nothing to offer. Now we have a problem of water height in Lake Victoria. Would you, the arts people, would you just go and talk to the water height and it will disappear? So he believed in those scientists that can provide a tangible and strict interventions. But to me, I strongly believe that even when you're a scientist, the way you package yourself, the way you present yourself, to me is very critical. Because for me to give you audience, actually, for those of you who have been to my office, you know, when you come to my office and you're ramshackled, I will first close and frown my face and I'm like, am I safe? Am I dealing with a terrorist? Am I dealing with the right person? And in the end, you corrupt my thinking and my probably attitude towards you. And that I'm not saying that I'm being so strict, but I'm only putting my point across that please kindly continue being presentable in whatever you're doing and be good people. I think precisely that's what I'd wanted to pass on. Otherwise, I commend whoever's done anything possible to make this event happen today. We shall continue engaging. We are fully aware and alive to the program that is supposed to be implemented. We have been reliably informed after here we shall be going for lunch. Then you go and freshen, then come back at 5. So for those of us, the wazee is we shall be required to first vacate, go back home, and then come back probably in the evening, God willing. Otherwise, I wish you the best stay. When the event finally ends, tomorrow we expect you to travel back to your respective partner states. We wish you a safe journey and continuous engagement. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Like I said, when assessment comes, it's always a good time to learn, and it's a good thing that you people know that you are always welcome to ask questions where you need clarity. And now, the last administrative announcement before you go for lunch. I'm sorry, these keep coming up. Ugandans, you need to take a copy of your national ID to the desk for photocopying to attach on your registration form. And then for the rest of the delegates, before you go for lunch, kindly ensure that you first take your COVID test. We have made arrangements that the tests are going to be made here in the corner. So we are also making arrangements for those of you that still do not have your food coupons. You will be picking them after taking the test. Please ensure that you take your test today, because if you don't, your results will delay. And as much as we are hospitable, I don't think you guys want to have Christmas far from home. Okay? So we can start moving. Make sure that you social distance while you go for your tests. So the first person, probably Nemo is nearest. You can just go with your passport and take that test in the corner. Ugandans, before you go for lunch, please make sure that you have taken a copy of your national ID. For our guests, you can just proceed to have lunch, because these announcements are not binding to you. But for those that have to travel tomorrow or tomorrow next, make sure you take your COVID test.
Hello.
This is Derek.
Hello, Khaled. Hello, how are you?
Probably want to be friends with you, so I'm introducing you guys ahead of time. That's the difference. Tripod
Tukyaliwo by tukyaliwo. Just yangambe room bagenda gikyusa bagenda mayinza oteekamu emmeeza gundi obadde ogisoma tewali kisoma ekitawaani.
There was no charge. Enough charge. Yeah. Yeah, smart. It's me and my go. I just had charge. That will say our cut.
No.
Sigina Musa, Marekam, but what do you want to say this? Because I'm going to see the public transport. Mugambe City, who are in that.
Hello. Hey. How are you? Just disappeared then.
Disappeared on the Facebook from you.
Oh, come on. You disappeared. Have you looked for me?
I've seen you.
I have seen you. I might lead you.
Fine with not yet slept. You're having a party, how would you sleep? Even today, you might come back in the
Hello. Ino obzo oba oyina gundi switch oba oyina switch yokka tusobola gikozesa nga oyina gundi kali kagundi connectinga tusobola giconnectinga neba nga ekola nga oba oyina okubeera neno black neno kati eno eyo software yowa black that's a different software naye ng'akola ng'eno naye asobola oba oimportinze camera separate. Ati nga oba nekiri eri kigundi waliwo ka switch kali akaliwo split eri different split eyingiza kifaananyi kati oba oyagala yingizaamu cameras 4 oba 3 osobola okozesa capture card kati wano eno weekolera eno webeekolera
So cool. Video. No.
I need to buy an iPhone. Good. I may need to buy a Mac. So it's normal. Let's say so. That's like that. And let's see if I can find a camera. That's a deal. She loves me so much. I know she gets the shoe.
No, but my man, in everything, yeah? You should be thankful because there is somewhere to start.
The first one I've had was that I thought of achieving, and I did it that way.
Man, you never
Then you come out, pick up your photograph. You can't afford that you're fire.
And you go home and sit quiet and sleep. Get the winners, announce new ambassadors, and go home. Christmas is near the corner.
Nze bino bye njagala okukola bye njagala documentary nze ze njagala nze olaba ddala gundi yange YouTube bino bye ndaba byokka ate nga actually nze Peter yangamba naye buli kaseera ebyo byolaba nze byenja documentaries z'ebisolo documentaries z'entalo documentaries no idea bino ate nina YouTube tenywa YouTube yange tenywa zolaba video ey'eddakiika essaawa ng'erimu embiizi 2.
We can stop streaming.
Yeah, it's off.
No, stop streaming. No. Okay, and the limit in there.
Itakareba ending.
Want to bomb